Does it feel different to be up there without a rope?
It's obviously like much higher consequence.
People who know a little bit about climbing, they're like, oh, he's totally safe. And then people who really know exactly what he's doing are freaked out.
I've thought about El Cap like for years, and every year I'm like, that's really scary. I'll never be content unless I at least put in the effort. El Cap is the most impressive wall on Earth.
It's 3,200 feet of sheer granite. It's the center of the rock climbing universe.
Obviously, I get interview questions about it all the time. Oh, would you like to do that? And you're like, yes, for sure.
I've always been conflicted about shooting a film about free soloing just because it's so dangerous. It's hard to not imagine your friend falling through the frame to his death.
I think when he's free soloing, that's when he feels the most alive, most everything. How can you even think about taking that away from somebody?
No mistakes tomorrow.
I'm starting to get kind of psyched.
If you're pushing the edge, eventually you find the edge.
I can't believe you guys are actually gonna watch. Hey Jimmy, do you copy? Just started climbing.
Wow, how cool is that? I am so excited to be joined here today with Alex Honnold. Alex is clearly a professional rock climber whose audacious free solo ascents of America's biggest cliffs have made him one of the most recognized and followed climbers in the world. He is distinguished for his uncanny ability to control his fear while scaling cliffs of dizzying heights without a rope or anything to protect him if he falls. His very, very humble attitude towards such extreme risk has earned him the nickname Alex No Big Deal Honnold. And a tiny bit more background, in 2017, Alex completed the first and only free solo of El Capitan's free rider route. That's 3,000 feet, a historic accomplishment, which of course has been hailed by many as one of the greatest sporting achievements of our time. And this achievement was captured in the Oscar-winning film Free Solo. We are honored to have him here with us during EDA Summit 2023. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I always love when I meet people who have achieved such greatness. I always love to go back to the start and ask, how did this begin? I'm going to name drop. A couple of months ago, I interviewed Simone Biles, and she said that she would bounce off everything in the house, driving her mum mad before she did any gymnastics. So I guess my question is, were you climbing up the stairs the wrong way in your house?
Yeah, actually, my mom says much the same thing, that I was always standing on top of things. And I remember always getting on top of play sets, and, you know, I broke my arm twice falling out of trees and falling off of play sets and things. And then my parents read about a climbing gym opening when I was 10, and that gave me a more structured outlet for my desire to climb things.
I took my daughter to one of those climbing places recently, and, you know, she struggled and found a way and really enjoyed it. But do you have to be a certain type of person to know that you are going to be a good climber? Or can anyone commit to this and become a really good climber?
I think anyone could be a good climber. I think particularly for kids, I think that climbing is a pretty elemental movement pattern, sort of like running or swimming. You know, it's like a basic, innate, like hardwired desire to move your body in that way. And I think that it's really only as adults that we develop the fear of heights and things like that. And so I think, you know, if you get into it when you're a kid, it's pretty basic.
Right. So there you are. You're at a climbing gym. Obviously, it's all safety, right? You've got to fill in forms. You've got ropes and carabiners and all of the other things, the names of which I clearly don't know. At what point did you, as a youngster, think, I need more than this? This is no longer doing it for me.
Oh, it took a long time. I mean, I climbed in the gym all the time, you know, 4 or 5 days a week for 8 years. I mean, basically until I graduated high school and had to eventually stole my family car, and then was able to start going outside more. But, you know, to me, that was enough. I mean, I loved climbing at the gym.
So the gym was obviously, that was the foundation of everything. But then things start getting serious. At what point, take us back to that time where the gym was not so much in the past, but wasn't the main core of what you were doing, and you were finding other challenges, other opportunities. What were you looking for? What would qualify for you as a climb worth doing in those early days?
Well, so climbing is, I mean, I assume you're sort of hinting at how I got into free soloing and climbing without a rope, but there's an important distinction to be made that climbing without a rope is still only a small part of my total climbing. And if you watch the film Free Solo, let's say, which highlights the several years of effort that I put into free soloing El Cap, I mean, ultimately, I succeed in climbing El Cap without a rope. But over those 2 years, I mean, most of the time was spent training with partners, training with ropes, training with friends, going bouldering, training in the gym, basically doing things that are mostly safe. So even as an adult and being known as a free soloist, I still spend, 90+% of my time climbing with partners, climbing with ropes. And so it's not really fair to say that I ever made a transition from, gym climbing not being enough to only wanting to free solo. It was more that as I matured as a climber, and like literally as I came of age and was able to drive and things like that, I felt like I wanted to explore the full spectrum of climbing. And climbing is quite broad. It includes mountaineering, it includes like peak bagging, it's traditional climbing, placing your own protection, sport climbing, bouldering. It's like all these different elements. And I was interested in all of them. And I tried, and I still do all of them to some extent. I'm just most well known for the free soloing.
And I do want to obviously talk about free solo. I always just love to hear how you build up to something that for many is something they'll probably never try. When you are climbing, no matter what the format is, what is your state of mind? Number one, do you think of it as a sport? Are you competitive with yourself? Or do you see it as like this connection with yourself on a different plane? Maybe it's spiritual. What goes through your mind when you are on a cliff edge of some sort?
Yeah, so I see it as more of a sport than some climbers, I think. There definitely is a little bit of a split in the climbing world between people who come into it from more of a aesthetic, sort of artistic background, who see it as a way to commune with nature. And then I have always approached it from slightly more of an athletic background. I grew up climbing in a gym and I liked the sporting aspect. I mean, I love being in nature and I love the beautiful views and, I appreciate all that as well. But ultimately, I came to it for the movement. Like I like the feeling of climbing, like the sport of it. And so, yeah, I'd say I have more of an athletic background in that way. But part of what I love about climbing is that when I'm on the wall, I'm fully focused on what I'm doing. I mean, and people describe that in a lot of sports, but it's all about that feeling of full focus on the task at hand.
So for those who don't know, because they've never really explored the topic much, tell us what is involved when you're solo, when you are taking far more risk than with the normal setup when it comes to climbing, especially with partners. So what is that change? How different is it?
It's pretty different. I mean, you can imagine that it is in fact a very different feeling. If you know that you're going to die if you fall, it demands a certain higher level of focus, a higher level of commitment to it. I mean, you put a lot more into it, but I think in return, you also can get more from it. It's just a more intense experience all the way around.
Do you feel, or I guess I should ask, how far do you feel that you become addicted to that intensity, the intensity of the experience? Because I imagine everything going through you is completely different when you are solo and there's no ropes involved versus when every bit of safety has been taken care of and you're there with partners, etc.
Yeah, it's not quite as stark of a contrast as you might think, because even when you have a partner and a rope, climbing still always has some element of danger or consequence to it. Like even if you have a rope, you still have to clip your rope into stuff. And if you fall, you still fall like a little ways down the wall. Basically, climbing is always fairly scary. And so climbing without a rope is obviously a lot more scary. It's a lot more intense, but there's never a time, or it's rare that you feel completely relaxed when you're climbing. So it's really just levels of, degrees of discomfort when you're doing it. I don't know.
So in many ways, I'm guessing you've learned how to manage that fear. So take us through this free solo climb of El Capitan. It was historic. You obviously made a decision to face up to this challenge. So what was behind that? And then tell us about just the start of that climb and what was going through your mind, how you were holding all of that together.
Yeah, free soloing El Cap was a big journey for me because I'd been dreaming about it for 9 years or so. Yeah. It basically came at the end of a very long path for me. I'd done a few other difficult free solos, and El Cap seemed like the clear next challenge for me. But then it took me 9 years to sort of build up to it. And part of that was because each year I kept coming into Yosemite thinking like today's, this is the year, like I'm finally going to do it. And then I would actually look at the wall and be like, there's no way I'm climbing El Cap this year. Like that's totally out of the question, because it's really intimidating. I mean, it's the 3,000-foot sheer wall. And it's one of the most historic and, sort of fabled walls on earth. Like as a climber, it holds a very specific and important place in climbing history. And so just to look at it, you see the history, you feel the immensity of it. You're like, that's too much. And so for years, I was like, that's just way too much. And then after, 6-7 years of sort of putting it off every year, I realized that it was just never going to look easy. Like I was never going to show up and see it and think, now I can do that.
Right.
And so I realized that I would have to put a ton of effort into it to even know whether or not it was possible. And sort of by sheer good fortune, that's when the film directors, Jimmy and Chai, the people who made the film Free Solo, they approached me that year about doing a documentary, and they didn't know anything about El Cap, and they just wanted to do a feature documentary of me climbing. And I was like, oh, what good timing, because to work on a big project like that is actually slightly easier to have a team, to have people to help you move the ropes around and like get on the wall. And in some ways it makes it a little bit less daunting when you're working on it with other people.
Right.
And so then I spent the next 2 years sort of working on it as we made the film, and then, ultimately did it. But I think the important thing for me with El Cap, like most of the other difficult, and I've done a lot of other difficult solos, some of which you see in that film, and a lot of which, are in other climbing films, and then 2/3 of which there's no footage at all. I've just gone and done them, but they're sort of, recorded for climbing history. But, with most of those solos, there were things that I could basically just maybe practice for a couple of days and then kind of go and do. With El Cap, it was years of effort that I put into it.
When you say years of effort, forgive me because I just don't know. Do you mean you would do different routes? You would practice different. You're looking for different grips and holds so that when you eventually do it free solo, you'll know where you're going. Is that what we're talking about, or is it more?
No, that's part of it for sure. So yeah, when I say years of effort, I mean it's not actually years on that route, because the climbing season in Yosemite is really only the spring and the fall. So right. You have, say, a month or two in the spring and a month or two in the fall where conditions on the wall are suitable for rock climbing. Otherwise, it's too hot or too cold or too wet or whatever, snow and things like that. And so I would spend the springtime working on it, and then I would spend the summer training and getting excited for the next season. And then I would spend the fall working on it, and then I would spend the winter training and sort of working on side objectives, things that were related but not the same, obviously. And so with a couple years of clear focus on your whole year either training for or working on the route in Yosemite, and then in the spring and fall seasons, that's when I would do what you were just describing, the actual on the wall, memorizing holds, figuring out paths. And there was a surprising amount of that, like finding the way, like looking for the correct way up the wall.
You mentioned the documentary team and this incredible film that was put together. How different does the challenge become when you're being filmed? There are cameras on you from every angle. There are probably moments where the director will go, "Oh, Alex, you just hold on a sec. We just need to get a focus point on you."
Well, so by the time I actually did the climb, there was none of the like, hold on, let me change batteries. Like we were a well-oiled machine, and there was definitely no, though it did take us a while to get to that point, because when we were first working on it, there's a lot of indecision as to where the camera should be. It's really hard for the cameramen to get onto the wall as well. So, I mean, because they're also ascending ropes and rappelling and doing all these relatively difficult techniques to get into the correct positions. So it took us all a while to learn where they should be, where I would be climbing, the pace at which I would be climbing, how quickly they could move. But by the time I finally did the climb, it was incredibly well executed. Like everybody knew exactly what to do. There's no conversation. There's no waiting for anything. I mean, actually, I waited a tiny bit to make sure the director could make it to the summit ahead of me, because he was filming 600 feet down, and I was climbing quite quickly that day. And so I gave him like a little head start to make sure that he could get to the summit to sort of capture capture the top out. But that was fine. It was totally fine to give him like an extra minute of head start. It's like, okay.
You just had to cling on to an area for a bit longer than you normally would.
No, there are ledges here and there. So like every 100, 200 feet, you can stop in different places. I actually remember I was climbing this section of the wall that was kind of around a corner from him. And so he couldn't see me. And I was making little bird whistles every once in a while, so he could keep track of where I was on the wall, to like basically to force him to go faster, because I knew that, because ascending ropes is very hard work as well. So, and he's carrying all his gear, and he's like, you can hear him breathing super heavily trying to get up these ropes. And I'm like climbing next to him, all joyous, making little bird calls. I was like, faster, faster. But basically, all that to say, we were quite a good team, and by the time I did the climb, it was really well done.
Yeah. You sound like you enjoy it. You sound like when you're on these challenges, which are death defying, let's be honest, you're actually having a good time. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. And I mean, and to say they're death defying, I mean, is true, in that if you fail, you would die. But the thing about it is that, I get to choose my day. It's not like someone assigns, like, you have to do it on this day.
Yeah.
And so I can work on it as long as I need until it feels perfect, until I feel joyous thinking about it, until I'm excited about it, until I feel comfortable with it. And so, part of the joy of free soloing is to take something that looks impossible or feels impossible. You look at it, you're like, that's so scary. And then to work on it, or to work on yourself to like progress as a climber enough that you get to the point that it's just not scary in the same way, that you look at it and you're like, that looks fun, and now I can do it. And,
Right.
to take something that seems impossible and to make it fun is the best process.
Of course. So how important is state of mind? Because, okay, so I clearly am not a climber. I watch the videos of you, and I can feel that, well, you probably never feel this when you get that moment, you think, oh my God, I'm going to fall. That you feel it in your fingers and in your toes. There's almost a fear watching someone else do it. What is your state of mind when you're in a position where one single mistake and it's over?
I mean, it's complicated. Ideally, my state of mind is relaxed and clear-headed and, smooth. But the thing is, realistically, there are always moments that get a little bit scary. It's like, even on the most cool and composed free solo, even something like free soloing El Cap, which is is for sure the most effort I've ever put into a climb and the most well prepared. And it went incredibly smoothly, but there were still moments where I was like, this is kind of scary. Where, like, I remember one specific moment, and this isn't in the film because there was nobody there filming. And actually, this goes back to a question you had earlier about what it's like having people all over the wall. But it's funny because on the day that I did the climb, there were, I don't know, 6 or 10 people filming in different positions. No, there were like 5 or 6 people, but they had remote cameras in a few places as well.
Yeah.
But either way, that means that, say there were 5 individuals on the wall. That means there was a person every 600 feet. And doing 600 feet of rock climbing and then passing somebody and being like, hi, and then being gone again for another 600 feet. That's a long ways that you're by yourself. And so, when somebody asks like, oh, what's it like having people all over? You're kind of like, it's not really people all over. It's more like a few friends scattered across this immense monolith. And every time you pass one of them, you're like, what a joy, I'm seeing one of my friends. And then they're gone again. And you're back to just being alone up there.
But despite all of the preparation, all of your training, there's bound to be things that happen that you're not expecting. Okay, so here's one of my childish questions now. In all of this free solo, have you ever been attacked by a bird or a spider's shown up from nowhere and is instantly a distraction from the plan?
No, I've been attacked by birds several times, and they were all very memorable experiences. I've had all those sorts of things happen. But, to some extent, the unexpected, you just expect the unexpected. Like, you're prepared for random things to happen. You're prepared. And I spend a lot of time ahead of time visualizing that kind of stuff, like what ifs, like, thinking through possible scenarios, like how will it feel if some random thing happens, something that I'm not expecting. And so then when those things do occur, they're just less surprising. It's still always a little surprising when you get attacked by a bird. But that said, someone's like, what happens if you get stung by a bee? You're kind of like, what does happen? Like, who cares? If it's your life on the line, are you even going to flinch when you get stung by a bee? Like, in normal life, I hate getting stung by bees. Like, I don't want to get stung by anything. But if you're clinging to a cliff and your life depends upon it and something stings you, you don't even notice. Like, it doesn't even matter.
You just push through. You mentioned rain. I haven't even thought about that, because obviously you must do a weather forecast. You know what type of storms are coming in, if any, and you probably wouldn't climb. But if an unexpected rain shower happens, does the grip change? Do you feel that you no longer have as much control over that grip as you might have done when it was dry?
Yeah, no, if it rains, you're screwed. If it actually rains, like if it storms on El Cap, it's very, very serious. But, the weather in California is quite stable, though this year was particularly heavy storms. But
Yes.
but the thing is, normally if you're climbing in Yosemite in May or June, it's incredibly stable, and you have a plan. And for that matter, when I free solo at El Cap, I started at dawn, so I started at 5 a.m. or so, and I was done by 9 in the morning. And typically afternoon thunderstorms would build throughout the afternoon. So it's basically all part of the plan. And again, that comes a little bit from the long-term preparation. The fact that I've spent, I don't know, when I free soloed at El Cap, at that point, I had spent, I guess, 12 years going to Yosemite every spring and fall. So maybe 3 months a year for the last 12 years. So I'd spent over 3 years of my life in Yosemite Valley. You wind up with a pretty good feeling of the weather and conditions, and you just get to know a place.
You're obviously very at ease with what you do, and you're brilliant at it. But tell me about some of maybe your family or your friends or your loved ones who perhaps aren't at ease as you are, and say things to you like, you know what, you've done it, Alex. Why don't you just stop now, because I can't take this, or I find it hard every time you go for one of these climbs. Do you have those conversations, or do they know you better than that?
No, I definitely have those conversations a little bit. I mean, the thing about free soloing is that nobody wants you to free solo. Like, none of my friends, none of my family, like, nobody wants you to do it. That said, they realize, I mean, if like my wife and I have a lot of conversations like this, and it's not that she's telling me not to do these things, because she knows that they're sort of core to who I am and what I love to do. But if you are married to a professional climber, basically I would say that she has a slightly more nuanced understanding of risk, because some of the free solos that I do are probably safer than some of the other things that I do as a climber, because when I'm not free soloing things, occasionally I'm on expeditions, going mountain climbing, doing first ascents of remote walls in Greenland. And like, technically I'm using a rope for that, but those are definitely way more dangerous overall, because, the weather is unpredictable. The rock conditions are unpredictable. You're so remote that if anything, even something sort of mundane like a broken leg happened, it could be really, really serious, because you're in the middle of nowhere. And so I think for the people who know me best, they can sort of put it in this broader context of like, well, if you're not working on some difficult free solo, then it might mean that you're on some first ascent in like some crazy remote part of the world, and that's even worse. And so it's all trade-offs.
It really is. But there are many people watching this right now and are probably wondering, how do you prepare physically? We've talked about the mental preparation, but what about the physical side? Tell us about your nutrition. Tell us about the actual exercise you do away from the wall.
Yeah, so actually I'll start with nutrition because it's relatively simple, but actually, if anyone's ever read the Michael Pollan book, In Defense of Food, it's like eat real food, eat real food, not too much, mostly plants.
Right.
That's like kind of my motto. I try not to eat anything too crazy. There's nothing super strict. I've been vegetarian for a long time, but mostly for environmental reasons, just because minimizing my environmental impact. And so that said, if meat is going to go to waste or something, someone's throwing it away, I'm like, yeah, I'll eat it. Like, I like it, but I just wouldn't buy anything. I wouldn't choose to kill something. But yeah, nothing too crazy. Basically just try to stay fit. And then the physical side, the actual training side, is a little more complicated. Well, actually, it's pretty simple too. I just climb all the time.
Yeah.
But, in regards to the specific free solos, like on El Cap, it's pretty easy to know what you need physically, because you can just climb the route with a rope. So if you can climb it, and technically free soloing is easier than climbing with a rope, because when you climb with a rope, you have a harness on, which has, say, 5 to 10 pounds worth of gear, maybe 5 pounds of gear. And then your actual rope, the rope weighs maybe 10 pounds. And then as you clip it into things, it creates rope drag. And so you wind up with like more than 10 pounds of weight pulling down on you. So when you're climbing with a rope, you have like, say, 15 pounds of training weight sort of pulling you down. And if you climb without a rope, you have, none of that. So it's funny though, because I say, technically it's easier to climb without a rope. The reality is it doesn't quite feel like that, because when you're climbing without a rope, you often hold on a lot tighter. You're like really holding on. And so you wind up getting fatigued more quickly. But it's all trade-offs.
Of course. That is so interesting. But so therefore, I think what you're telling me is you're not in the gym doing like multiple pull-ups or lifting specific weights. You use your climbing as your training.
Yeah, I do mostly use my climbing for my training. Actually, as soon as we're done chatting today, I'm going to be doing some like full-on calisthenic stuff like that, like some pull-ups and leg lifts and like basic fitness things. Today happens to be a quote unquote rest day, so I'll do kind of like my extra fitness things like that on the rest day. Because I climbed a lot yesterday, I'll do a really big climb tomorrow, and so the in between I kind of do the like normal training stuff.
It's amazing. You are so committed. You mentioned that you're, did you say vegan or vegetarian? I'm so sorry.
Sort of. I often say aspiring vegan, but realistically, I'm sort of a loose vegetarian.
Right, loose vegetarian. So do you get, because I'm obsessed by this stuff, but do you get enough protein? Because you need so much muscle and a very specific capabilities of that muscle. Do you find enough protein in the vegetarian world?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't even actually worry about it. I kind of think the protein thing is a little bit overhyped because I'm not trying to be big. I'm not trying to be a bodybuilder. No. And climbing is all strength to weight ratio. And so I actually think that for a professional climber, and especially for the type of climbing that I'm trying to do, which often involves very long days on the mountain, sort of like 12-hour plus of sustained moderate effort. In a lot of ways, I think it's actually more akin to like a peasant in the developing world, like somebody working hard in fields for like a whole day.
Right.
I mean, and a lot of people with that lifestyle basically eat, rice and vegetables their whole life, and they're incredibly lean, incredibly muscular, and really capable of hard work. I'm kind of like, that's basically what you do as a climber. I'm not like a Tour de France cyclist, who's like a racehorse. And I'm not like a bodybuilder, like lifting huge things. Like I basically just need to be able to work at a moderate level all day long.
I love it. Great answer. Thank you for that. So the climb, the El Capitan climb, obviously has brought you to the attention of so many people. How has it changed your life in the years since?
I mean, I'm a lot more recognizable, and so I get stopped at the airport a lot more and take pictures and things. But otherwise, that hasn't actually changed my day to day that much. I mean, I'm still going. As I said, I'm climbing tomorrow. I climbed yesterday. It's like I'll be climbing, 5 days this week, working on things that are difficult for me. That aspect of it is basically the same. I mean, I think the biggest difference is I have a foundation that supports solar projects around the world, the Honnold Foundation. And that has taken off quite a bit since the film, just because my overall profile is raised so much. And so I think that's probably the best thing for me, is just to see the success of the foundation and actually be able to do something useful in the world. But otherwise, the day-to-day life is basically the same.
Tell us about the foundation, because I know a lot of it is geared around renewable energy projects and more. Just give us the rundown.
Yeah, basically we support community scale solar projects around the world. So it's anything that uses solar to improve human livelihood, wherever. I mean, it basically started from me looking for projects that were good for the environment, but also help human populations. And then over the years, we just found ourselves gravitating to solar projects. We were always supporting solar. And so now that's explicitly the mission, supporting community-led solar projects.
And just out of interest, obviously the solar panel will generate power while the sun shines. Do you have any connection to or interest in the battery technology that could, of course, change things completely if it ever gets really good enough?
Yeah, so actually we just finished this very large and complicated project in Puerto Rico. That's the island's first solar microgrid. So that's, with battery storage and, it's like, the first cooperative solar microgrid. Basically case by case, we're interested in whatever is the best solution for the given community. So sometimes that involves storage, sometimes it doesn't. It just totally depends on what the community needs.
People watching this conversation right now obviously live in a very different world to the one in which you live, but they themselves have to deal with setbacks and plans that don't always pan out. You've had so much success, but of course there have been setbacks, and I won't even use the word failures, but moments that you probably weren't happy with. How do you find that internal motivation to get up and try again, or to try it differently and to approach it in a unique fashion after you've had a setback?
Yeah, I think that so climbing is an interesting sport in that it's both easier and harder to deal with failure. So on the one hand, it's easier in that there's never really a failure because the rock is always there. You can just go back the next season, you can train harder and you can try again. It's not like other sports where if you lose, you failed. It's like with climbing, you're sort of like, oh, I didn't manage to do it this season, but I'll be back in the fall and I'll try it again, and I'll be back in the spring. And so you never feel like there's a finality to it. It's not like you failed. On the other hand, as a climber, you basically fail all the time. Like the day to day as a climber, you're always trying things that are just past your limit. Like this is sort of complicated, but as a climber, you're normally working on whatever your project is, and your project is something that's sort of aspirationally hard. Like it's a little bit harder than what you've done before. It's difficult for you, and so it means that your day to day is you going to the cliff and trying your project and failing on it over and over, and you'll fail on it sometimes 100 times. And as soon as you succeed on it once, as soon as you climb the route once, you've done it, and then you move on to the next project. And so it basically means that you're always failing. Like earlier this year, I spent a whole month trying this one route, and I would go out and I would try it 3 times each day. I would fail each time. And after 5 weeks of effort on it, I succeeded. And then we left for this trip. And so I was like, oh, I spent 5 weeks failing to succeed on this one climb. And then as soon as I did it, it's done. And then you move on to the next project. It's just sort of like, so the day to day is you're always failing. But I think that but you don't see it as failing. You see it as sort of this long-term process. For me, it's all about the long term. You're like, I'm just trying to get better. The goal is always to improve as a climber. And so whether you succeed or fail on one specific route or like one specific goal, like that doesn't matter as much compared to the long-term journey of growing as a climber.
Now, that's such a fascinating perspective. You're right. He was constantly trying everything, fail, and then success. And that was the objective all along.
Well, but then success, it's not like that one thing was even the goal. I mean, to me, the goal is to have something to work toward. It's like the specific project, whether you succeed or fail on it. I mean, the whole fun of it is to have something that gets you out of bed and keeps you motivated to train and like keeps you on a sort of correct life path. It's like, whether you succeed or fail on any specific route doesn't really matter compared to having a reason to get out of bed and train and be motivated and get your work done so that you can go train after, things like that. Like, to me, it's just to have something to keep you psyched on life, basically.
Yeah, totally understand that. What do you do when you have what you believe is maybe a pull or an injury, maybe shoulder isn't feeling right? Do you just work through it, or do you rest up? And if so, how long will you wait until you get back out there again?
So as a climber, you're always dealing with some little thing, at any given time. I'm like, oh, my back, my shoulders, it's like, you use every muscle of your body when you're climbing. You're constantly like, oh, I strained a little thing. But that said, I almost never rest. Like you're constantly finessing things like that. Like it's rare that you're injured seriously enough that you have to stop. Typically you just sort of adjust little things, or maybe you don't train one specific thing that day and save it for the next day, let things heal. But there's always something that's like getting better, something that's getting worse. You're always balancing little things. Like right now, one of my knees is kind of hurting. I think I like strained something, and so I haven't run for weeks. But I'm like, that's fine because I can still hike fine without pain. I'm still climbing well. I'm just like, what? I let running go for a couple months probably, and then eventually my knee will probably feel better, and basically I'm not stressed about it. Like, but you can still climb full time.
Nice. Well, we talked about the challenges of climbing, but you set yourself a different challenge, and it was writing the book Free Solo, which, by the way, our audience can win a free signed copy. So attendees, for you now, don't forget to check out our Game On section. The book is it's a memoir of your life as a climber, but it's also a deeply personal reflection on your motivations, fears, relationships. What inspired you to get it all written down, and how did that challenge compared to the challenge of some of the big climbs you've been on?
Well, so my book actually, it's titled Alone on the Wall, which actually predated the film Free Solo, and then I added more to it after with the film. But so the book was co-written with David Roberts, who's a friend of mine who's unfortunately now deceased, actually died of cancer, sadly. But he was this great mountaineering author. And so we wrote the book before the film Free Solo came out, like before my profile was so much higher. And at the time, it was this great opportunity for me to work with this, legendary author who I knew and respected. I was like, oh, this is great. We can work on this thing together. It was almost like mentorship, where I was like, I can learn so much from him. And then actually after the film came out, I added to it myself. The final chapters of the book I wrote myself, just to sort of reflect on my Free Solo experience. And that was largely because the process of freestyling El Cap was such a big and meaningful part of my life. I just kind of wanted to document it all while it was fresh. I wrote it all in the months after I did the climb. Actually, yeah, in the 2 months after I did the climb, I sort of spilled the whole process out, just to make sure that it was all somewhere. And then that got added to the book in the paperback version.
Did you, yeah, forgive me, I got the title wrong there, but can you tell us about that title, Alone on the Wall? Because you have talked about how very often there are partners and other people involved, but obviously this was a perspective that you wanted to make the title of the book.
Well, and part of it, though, is Alone on the Wall was also my first film as a climber. And, the film Free Solo has now totally eclipsed any of the old climbing films that I've done. But Alone on the Wall was sort of the first thing that I did, and it's just catchy. It's a cool, it's a cool title. Though, funny enough, my co-author David had written a book called Alone on the Ice as his previous book about an Arctic explorer, and so he was like, "Oh, I just write about people exploring alone," It was
That is funny, but it's sometimes, you are so well versed in all things climbing. But to actually sit and to write, that must have been difficult for you in so much as it was just not what your core love is.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, but actually I remember a lot of the time I spent writing. My now wife and I had road trip to Wyoming to climb through the summer, which is pretty normal, just following the cooler conditions, going north and climbing all summer. But I remember a bunch of time in the van driving, me just sitting there typing away while she drives. And then the thing is, even if you're climbing full time, you still have mornings and evenings where you're resting or just hanging out in the van. And when you're living in a van, there's not that much else to do. So typing is totally great. So I actually never, I definitely know a lot of other authors who have to lock themselves in a cell and just type for months to finish their book. But for me, especially because this was such a personal story and something I cared about a lot, and something that could kind of gush out of me because it was so current and I was so excited about it. It's pretty easy just every day after climbing, you just type as fast as you can for a couple hours and pretty soon it's all out.
Brilliant. One question I was meaning to ask you, many of our attendees are working to look at new ways of doing things, new ways of thinking. The world around them is changing with the onset of AI and everything else. And then there are the big sporting stories, the likes of Tiger Woods, for example, who completely changed his game from what he was used to and found victory again. Have you ever had to change your approach to the climbing challenge? Have you ever looked at what you've done and thought, I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to find a way to do it even better?
I mean, a little bit. I would say that I'm constantly changing training modalities and like techniques and things. Yeah, I mean, it might not be so dramatic as Tiger Woods changing his swing at the height of his career, but I'd say as a climber, you are constantly trying to learn new things and adapt, because the climbing world is constantly changing as well. I mean, like the style of indoor climbing has completely changed since I was a kid. Climbing is in the Olympics now, and so competition climbing is more. I don't do competitions, but that sort of trickles down into what like average climbers are doing in the gym. And also like the standards are just constantly rising. It's like the next generation of climbing talent is much, much better than I am or than I ever was as a kid. And so, you're constantly trying to keep with the times and to improve and to learn new things. I mean, yeah.
What do you put that down to, by the way? Why would the next generation be better climbers?
Oh, I mean, there are a lot of things, but part of it is just the rise of climbing gyms. I mean, you said that you took your daughter to a climbing gym. Like that kind of opportunity used to be sort of few and far between. Like when I grew up, climbing gyms just weren't that common and the facilities weren't that nice. But now they're ubiquitous. Like every major city in the country has multiple climbing gyms and they're really nice facilities. So they have good climbing and good fitness apparatuses and stuff. So now, and part of it is just the norms, like the standards are different, because if you're a 12-year-old climbing in the gym now, you see what's possible, you see what other people are doing, and you're like, well, I could do that, or like, I want to surpass that, and so part of it is just what you expect from yourself and what you seek, like what you strive for.
That's brilliant. Thank you. You've accomplished so much as a climber. I guess one of my last questions is, what are your goals and dreams for what comes next? Is there something you've not yet achieved, or are you looking just to continue to refine what it is you do? That's hitting that wall.
Well, I would say my climbing goals are Pretty much the same. Like, I mean, right now I'm working on this specific wall and with the rope and a partner, just hoping to be able to climb it. It's quite difficult. We tried it yesterday. We'll go back tomorrow. We're just grinding away at it. So climbing goals are relatively similar. I think the biggest difference in my life is that my wife and I have a daughter now. And so, we're parenting and, we may have more than one child and you're like, oh, that's a lot. So basically, life is a little more complex and it's just, there's more going on. But I'd say on the climbing front, I'm pretty much the same. It's just the rest of life is starting to catch up a little bit.
Oh, for sure. And congratulations on the little one. How old now?
14 months.
Oh my goodness.
Actually, I can faintly hear her yelling in another room. I'm like, oh, I wonder
Yes.
what's going on out there.
I'm sure she'll need some attention.
Yeah, exactly.
It just keeps getting better. Alex, you're an incredible inspiration. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing your experience and your incredible story. We really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no, my pleasure. Nice chatting.
And as a reminder to you, our attendees, be sure to check out the Game On section to see how you can win an autographed copy of Alex Honnold's book, Alone on the Wall. And once again, Alex, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure.